This week's edition of This Week in Amateur Radio is 100% human. Heard every week on the amateur radio bands all around the world and broadcast on low-power AM and FM stations all across the United States, and one of the first podcasts to appear on the internet, we are This Week in Amateur Radio, the worldwide premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service of the air. Here are the stories for release around the earth as we come to air with edition number 1401 of This Week in Amateur Radio. 2026 launches the ARRL's Year of the Club, a year-long celebration of amateur radio clubs and competitions. We will have all the details with team coverage. The United States is actively jamming global positioning signals in the Caribbean. Chairman Carr of the FCC highlights the agency's accomplishments during 2025. The FCC has presented a petition to expand the general mobile radio service and the family radio service with more allocations in the VHF low band. Amateur Radio Digital Communications launches 44Net Connect. We will tell you all about it. With the beginning of the new year, newly elected ARRL section managers assume office. We will introduce them to you. The Youth on the Air camp application period is now open. At NASA, launch teams have rehearsed the Artemis 2 countdown. 4 amateur rules and regulations are set for deletion from Part 97 in February, and hams in New Zealand will use the prefix ZM during this, their centenary year. We will have all the news and information you need to know coming up in this week's report. These headline stories will come to you in a moment along with this week's special features. We'll visit with Bruce Page, KK5DO, and get an update from AMSAT and what's new with all of those amateur satellites in orbit. Australia's own Arnold Bench Shop, BK6FLAB, and Foundations of Amateur Radio continues his series on building a Radio Shack with Part 3, which is entitled The Ingress of Coaxial Cable. Our own amateur radio historian, Will Rogers, K5WLR, returns with another brand new edition of A Century of Amateur Radio. This edition takes a look at the use of CQ, which is used as a general call for initiating a contact. This took time to become an acceptable practice in the early years. Serious operators frowned on its use, mostly because it had been used to excess in the old days among the little boys with what they called squeak boxes, usually in exceedingly long and sparsely identified calls. This historic edition is called Call and Card. And we will stop by and visit with Bill Sawyers, AJ8B in the DX Corner with all the latest news on DXpeditions, DX, upcoming radio sport contests, and a lot more. That's all straight ahead as North America's premier amateur radio and technology news magazine and bulletin service, This Week in Amateur Radio, takes to the air right now. Reporting from our headquarters studio here in snowy and chilly Albany, New York, although it looks like we're going to be getting a January thaw pretty shortly, I'm George, W2XBS.
And reporting from our news bureau in Sandwich, Illinois, where 2026 has officially begun, and now the important part of remembering to put 2026 on any documents I sign, I'm Jordon Kurtz, Kilo Echo 9, Bravo, Papa Oscar.
And reporting from our news bureau in Orland Park, Illinois, where I bring in the new year with a new call, I'm Mike Nikolich, K9DXM.
And reporting from our news bureau just outside Rochester, New York, along the southern shore of Lake Ontario, this is George, Kilo Charlie 2, Oscar X-Ray Juliet.
And reporting this week from our news bureau in Syracuse, New York, at station K2MST in the Museum of Science and Technology. And let me tell you, the lake effect snow machine has been in overdrive in Syracuse this week. Feet and feet of snow. If you're not familiar with lake effect, Google it. I'm Chris Perrine, KB2FAF.
Coming to you from a rather nippy but still sunny Space Coast in Florida, I'm Ed Johnsen, W2PH.
And reporting from our Troy, New York News Bureau, where we're all another year older, I'm Eric, Kilo Delta 2, Romeo Juliet X-Ray.
And reporting from our amateur radio outpost in the Catskill Mountains of upstate New York, where our wood stove is working hard to keep the single-digit temperatures at bay. I'm Don Hulick, K2ATJ.
As we turn the calendar to a new year, ARRL is launching a year-long celebration that puts the spotlight squarely where it belongs, on radio clubs. John Ross, KD8IDJ, files this report from League headquarters.
Beginning January 1st, 2026, ARRL officially recognizes the Year of the Club, an initiative designated by the ARRL Board of Directors to honor the vital role clubs play in sustaining, growing, and energizing amateur radio. Radio clubs are the backbone of ARRL and of the amateur radio service itself. For countless hams, a club is the first welcoming doorway into a hobby, a place to learn, to operate, to build, and to belong. Clubs create opportunities for mentoring, public service, technical exploration, and lifelong friendships. Simply put, when clubs thrive, amateur radio thrives. Throughout 2026, all ARRL-affiliated clubs are invited to participate in special programs, operating events, and recognition opportunities designed to celebrate club accomplishments and inspire new ideas. ARRL will be rolling out initiatives focused on supporting club growth, strengthening activities, and recognizing clubs that help expand ARRL membership or reach significant milestones, including 100 years of ARRL affiliation. There are new ways to celebrate and compete. 2 exciting contests are already underway to kick off the Year of the Club, highlighting how clubs connect with members and the broader community. Details for entering the ARRL Club newsletter contest and the ARRL Club website contest are available now, with a shared submission deadline of January 30th, 2026 at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. The ARRL Club newsletter contest recognizes that newsletters are often the heartbeat of a club, sharing news and keeping members connected and involved. Does your radio club have a great website that supports club members but also attracts attention for your club? Well, then consider entering the ARRL Club website contest. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
Club websites play an increasingly important role in outreach, public service visibility, and attracting new members to amateur radio. Winners will be notified in May 2026, honored at the ARRL National Convention being hosted by the Huntsville Hamfest in August, and featured in QST. With more on this story, we go to our own Mike Nikolich, K9DXM.
In preparation for the Year of the Club, ARRL has launched a new club's website offering a modernized, accessible hub for affiliated clubs, prospective clubs, and individual hams looking to get involved with the club. For more details, we go back to League headquarters, where John Ross, KD8IDJ, files this additional report.
That site brings together information about club benefits, locations, resources, and ARRL affiliation all in one place. The message for 2026 is clear. Celebrate what your radio club already does well. Try something new and be radioactive. Whether your club is small or large, new or nearing a century as an ARRL affiliated club, the Year of the Club is an invitation to connect, innovate, and share your story. Follow all of the club programming for the year at clubs.arrl.org, Year of the Club, and make a 2026 year to remember for your club, for ARRL, and for amateur radio. Read more about it at arrl.org. I'm John Ross, KD8IDJ.
A standout new feature is the Club Map search tool, which lets users locate radio clubs by zip code and displays both an interactive map and list of nearby clubs. Try it at clubs.arrl.org/map. A new streamlined online application also simplifies the process for becoming a new ARRL affiliated club, and all clubs can use the new member verification tool as they set a club goal to increase ARRL membership among club members. The result is faster service, easier updates, and better support for the affiliated clubs. Everyone is encouraged to explore the new site and pages at clubs.arrl.org and affiliatedclubs.arrl.org. During 2026, every issue of QST will include club photos showcasing the people behind amateur radio's local success stories. Clubs are encouraged to gather members for photos, wear club or ARRL apparel, pose with banners or signs, and submit high-resolution photos along with names, call signs, and club information. It's a simple way to highlight your club's pride and presence on the national stage. See the photo submission guidelines at www.arrl.org/club-photos. In his editorial in the January 2026 issue of QST, ARRL Chief Executive Officer David Minster, NA2AA, noted that clubs have shaped his amateur radio journey from school clubs and field days to lifelong friendships built through shared activities. During the year of the club, he encourages members to recognize and thank volunteer leaders who make these experiences possible, while also looking ahead to new opportunities. ARRL will promote innovative ideas and best practices throughout the year, including content inspired by the Marconi program, motivating amateur radio clubs to open new initiatives. Clubs are also encouraged to explore creative projects from kit building nights and technical workshops to hilltopping, antenna expeditions, and new operating challenges. The year of the club also coincides with our nation's commemoration and celebration of the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. ARRL will mark the semi-quincentennial with special America 250 Worked All States Awards, including WAS and WAS Triple Play, and clubs will have the opportunity to participate through W1AW portable activations across the country, echoing the excitement of ARRL's centennial in 2014. The first state activations begin January 7th.
Military brinkmanship between the presidents of the USA and Venezuela has led to an increase in electronic warfare in the region. An escalating standoff between the United States and Venezuela has led both countries' militaries to jam satellite navigation signals in the Caribbean to guard against a potential attack, data shows, putting air and sea traffic in the region at greater risk of a collision or accident. At least some of the U.S. warships that have deployed to the Caribbean in recent months have been jamming GPS signals in their vicinity, according to an analysis of data provided by Stanford University and a U.S. official who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss operational matters. The Trump administration says the warships, which include the Navy's most modern aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, are targeting drug trafficking to the United States orchestrated by the Venezuelan government.
Federal Communications Commission Chairman Brendan Carr is closing out 2025 by touting what he described as a historic year at the agency. Looking ahead, Carr signaled that the Commission's aggressive agenda will continue into 2026. This is just the beginning, he said in a statement. The FCC is firing on all cylinders, and we will build on this momentum to deliver even more wins in 2026. A centerpiece of the chairman's 2025 agenda emphasized accelerating broadband deployment. He highlighted the FCC's effort to streamline the retirement of copper networks, overhaul environmental and historic permitting rules, and update pole attachment regulations. The agency proposed reforms to preempt state and local permitting barriers for towers and other wireless infrastructure, including those impeding the expansion of AI infrastructure. A new inquiry was also launched to address state and local regulations that block fiber, cable, and other wireline builds. On wireless leadership, the FCC advanced 5G and 6G by executing on a massive spectrum pipeline to deliver 800 megahertz of spectrum by 2034, set out in President Trump's Working Families Tax Cut Act, which also restored the FCC's auction authority. In the near term, the FCC has proposed to auction 180 megahertz of prime mid-band spectrum in the upper C-band by July 2027, and announced the 2026 auction of low-band AWS-3 spectrum covering 200 markets. Advancing satellites, the FCC enabled more robust direct-to-cell service by allowing satellite providers to operate on spectrum at higher power levels. The agency freed up more than 20,000 megahertz for satellites and proposed new technical rules to boost LEO satellite capacities by up to 180%. The FCC's Delete initiative targeted more than 1,100 rules and regulations, cutting 134,928 words and 312 pages from the Code of Federal Regulations. A total of over 2,000 initiative proceedings were terminated across wireline, wireless, and broadcast sectors. Part 95 changes for CB, GMRS, FRS, and the multi-use radio service included removing information about fines and penalties, because the overarching United States Code already details sanctions the FCC can take against errant radio operators. The transmission of false distress signals and station identification also were removed because the United States Code already addresses these issues too. Other actions include removing Roger beeps from being allowed on CB channels, removing GMRS antenna heights because other FCC and aviation rules cover it, not requiring paper licenses for amateur radio operators because they are now downloaded online, and some updates on the regions that volunteer examiner coordinators can serve in giving online license exams. It is expected that other rule cleanups will come in 2026 as the FCC continues to streamline regulations. Since we reported on these moves, the FCC report and order was published in the Federal Registry. Unless valid objections are raised before January 2nd, 2026, the rules will be deleted on February 10th, 2026. Carr also highlighted the FCC's move to end diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, as well as the FCC's reversal of an expansion to the E-rate program to fund school bus Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi hotspots.
One of the top stories we covered in 2025 was a proposal to add VHF low frequencies in the 30 through 50 megahertz range for use by family radio service users and general mobile radio service licensee. The proposal asks that the Federal Communications Commission reallocate underused frequencies to allow FRS and GMRS growth on frequencies that would offer farther range in some areas. National Capital Communications LLC, also known as Mid-Atlantic REACT in Washington, formally requested the FCC reallocate a series of outdated and abandoned frequencies to enhance GMRS and FRS capability. The petition was submitted by Michael C. Trajos, KAB7046, a longtime GMRS licensee who is a physician. He is also a general class ham with a call sign of KB4PGC and has other FCC licenses too. The petition was filed in response to FCC rulemaking efforts and aligned with President Trump's executive orders promoting deregulation and efficient government operations. The request highlighted a growing need for longer-range, publicly accessible communications tools in the face of increasingly severe natural disaster. Frequencies being sought in the proposal included old cordless phone channels at 46 and 49 megahertz, low-power baby monitor and walkie-talkie channels from 49.83 through 49.89 megahertz, and abandoned VHF low-paging frequencies at 35 and 43 megahertz. The latter assignment is being sought for 7 repeater channels with 300 watts of maximum power. The petitioner also asks the FCC to proceed forward with the petition and issue a rulemaking number to adjust the proposed reallocation of frequencies because it's in the public interest. No action has been taken so far, however. Communications channels remain open between the petitioner and the agency.
The Australian Communications and Media Authority, ACMA, has moved to stop unsafe mobile phones and other illegal radio equipment getting into consumers' hands with a new voluntary scheme aimed at online device sellers. Announced amid growing scrutiny on mobile phone emergency call reliability triggered by fatalities recently linked to 000 call issues, the scheme invites online retailers to take measures to block the sale of a range of dodgy radio communication devices, including gray market cellular handsets. The scope of radio communication devices that the Equipment Safety Pledge aims to capture is broad. It includes CBs, illegal transmission jamming devices, mobile phone boosters, and cellular mobile signal repeaters. However, it also includes gray market mobile phones, which have started to enter the increasingly volatile debate over the integrity of Australia's emergency calling ecosystem.
In Russia, their mysterious doomsday radio station has sent out another series of ominous messages, sparking fears in Europe that the nation is preparing for a broader war. The radio channel, known as UVB-76, broadcast multiple transmissions in code last week, sending 3 signals on Monday, followed by 8 more on Wednesday. Each of the cryptic messages featured a set of numbers and letters, including complete code word. As many as 15 secret messages have been heard by listeners. However, their meaning and intended recipient have remained a mystery.
There is now an easier way for ham radio experimenters to secure a static IP address specifically designed for amateur radio use. With more details, we go to John Ross, KD8IDJ, with this report.
ARDC, the Amateur Radio Digital Communications Organization, has introduced 44Net Connect, which it describes as a service that makes it easy for hams to begin using 44Net IPv4 addresses through a simple, modern setup. ARDC is best known as a foundation making grants to help fund amateur radio and/or digital communications technology, but this original mission was, and still is, to administer Internet Network 44, also known as 44Net or AMPRNet. This is a group of Internet addresses from 44.0.0.0/9 to 44.128.0.0/10, and it was set aside for amateur radio use when the Internet was first being organized back in the 1980s. According to ARDC, 44Net Connect uses modern, secure WireGuard networking that's already supported by many popular routers, including Netgear and TP-Link, and it works across a wide range of devices from desktop computers and phones to tiny Raspberry Pis. All in all, says ARDC, 44Net Connect makes 44Net more accessible and fun, helping more people experiment with networking amateur radio and digital communications technologies. More information and instructions for accessing the system are available on the ARDC website's 44Net Connect page. I'm John Ross, KD8I-DJ.
The group explains that whether you're experimenting with digital modes, improving repeater infrastructure, setting up a home lab, or just curious to see what 44Net is all about, this new service lowers the barrier of entry to get you started. The group says 44Net Connect offers 4 especially useful features: simple setup, a static IPv4 internet access that doesn't rely on your commercial internet service provider, bypassing carrier-level network address translation limitations, and a safe space to learn and experiment with networking technology without fear of breaking the internet.
There are 4 new section managers taking on the top volunteer leadership role in the ARRL field organization on January 1st, 2026. Brett Steeman, KD8SCL, has been appointed as the Ohio section manager to finish the term that will end September 30th, 2026. Steeman of Pataskala has recently served as the section emergency coordinator. He has taken the reins from Tom Sly, WB8LCD, who has decided to step down following his tenure as Ohio section manager since 2021. Mike Corey, KI1U, has been appointed to be the ARRL Rhode Island section manager, completing the term that will end June 30th, 2027. Corey of Coventry has been serving as the assistant section manager and public information coordinator. Rhode Island section manager Nancy Austin, KC1NEK, is stepping down early following her service in the position since 2023. Ralph Katz, AA8RK, will become the ARRL section manager of Michigan with a term ending June 30th, 2028. Katz of Ann Arbor was the only nominee for the position during the most recent election cycle. He succeeds Larry Camp, WB8R, who has served as the Michigan section manager since 2023 and from 2012 through 2017. Keith Elliott, W6KME of Newberry Park, California, will be the Santa Barbara section manager through June 30th, 2028. He was the sole nominee during the most recent election cycle. Elliott takes on the role of section manager after John Kitchens, NS6X, completes his term of office as section manager. Kitchens has served as section manager since 2018 and was elected to the ARRL Board of Directors last month to become the Vice Director of the Southwestern Division starting January 1st. The ARRL field organization is divided into 71 sections and is comprised of more than 60,000 volunteers among ARRL's membership. DXLook has introduced a new map layer system that allows additional data to be displayed directly on top of its propagation maps. The first available layers include North America Rain Radar and North America Snow Radar, providing real-time weather context alongside HF propagation data. Layers can be enabled or disabled individually to avoid clutter and preserve map readability. The new layer framework is designed to be extensible, and additional layers are planned. The DXLook team invites users to suggest new layer ideas and reliable public data sources that may benefit the amateur radio community. The update also brings back user-requested controls such as hide or show arcs to toggle propagation paths and hide or show labels to control call sign and time labels. Several UI and cosmetic improvements were also made to the main menu, improving usability on both desktop and mobile devices. DXLook is available on the web at dxlook.com. Say goodbye to IRCs, the coupons that are still in use in parts of the world by hams requesting QSL cards. Although International Reply Coupons, or IRCs, are still being used by some DX-chasing hams in their requests for QSL cards, that option is set to end by this time next year. Countries belonging to the Universal Postal Union have voted to discontinue their use effective December 31st, 2026. That vote was taken in September at the 28th Universal Postal Congress held in Dubai. There are a number of IRCs already in circulation that bear the expiration date of 31 December 2025, and they are expected to be honored for one more year. In an era marked by a migration toward confirmations on digital platforms and in digital QSOs, the move brings an already disappearing amateur radio practice to its conclusion. A statement from the Universal Postal Union said the sunset of the IRC, first put into practice in 1907, was a natural progression within the broader transformation of international postal services in alignment with the digital practices and modern outlook of their customers.
The largest commercial satellite to ever be in Earth orbit has been launched. It's the first of a planned constellation by AST Space Mobile, a Starlink rival that was recently granted use of amateur radio frequencies by the FCC. The huge satellite is called Bluebird 6, and it was launched on December 23rd from India's Satish Dhawan Space Center, blazing the path to the so-called next-generation constellation of space, cellular broadband satellites by AST Space Mobile. The satellite features an array of antennas which, when deployed, compares in size to the dimensions of a tennis court, 693 square feet or about 64 square meters. The project, by the Texas-based startup, is considered a direct rival to SpaceX's Starlink constellation. Last September, the FCC's Space Bureau granted AST Space Mobile limited use of frequencies in the amateur band between 430 and 440 megahertz. Permission was given on an emergency basis only, after overwhelming objections raised by ham radio operators and amateur radio societies worldwide. They argued that alternate UHF frequencies are available for the satellite's telemetry, tracking, and command functions.
For the first time, YOTA Camp will have a theme for the week. The theme will be space. For the best chance at being selected, applications should be submitted by 2359 UTC by the 15th of the month, 2026. Campers will be selected by the working group and notified by February 1. The application process is free. A $100 U.S. deposit is required upon acceptance. Should a potential camper be unable to pay the $100 deposit, he or she may apply for a scholarship or a waiver. Campers are also responsible for their own arrival and departure transportation to the camp's location. Travel assistance may also be available. Up to 50 campers will be accepted. Priority will be given the first-time attendees and youth residing outside of the USA. Only a limited number of returning attendees will be accepted and must serve as leaders during the camp. Leaders will be selected based on staffing needs to facilitate this year's session choice. Huntsville Amateur Radio Club is the local host for the 2026 camp. For details about the camp, visit the camp webpage at youthontheair.org.
It is the beginning of a brand new month, and that means it is time for this month's Volunteer Monitoring Report. The Volunteer Monitor, or VM program, is a joint venture between the ARRL and the FCC to enhance compliance in the amateur radio service. Technician operators in Connecticut, Washington, Kansas, New York, California, and Arizona were issued advisories concerning 20-meter FT8 operation, a band on which technicians have no privileges. A technician operator in New York was issued an advisory for a 17-meter FT8 operation, a band on which technicians also have no privileges. A club station in California was issued an advisory for operation with an expired license. 2 operators in Florida were issued advisories concerning identification of their stations on 40 meters. Section 97.119 Subpart A requires amateur stations to transmit the assigned call sign at the end of each communication and at least every 10 minutes during a communication. An operator in Utah received a notice of violation from the FCC for operation on 173.767 MHz, a frequency not authorized to the amateur service. An operator in Florida received a notice of violation from the FCC for broadcasting, prohibited by Section 97.113 Subpart B of the Commission rules, and for refusal to allow an inspection in violation of Section 97.103 Subpart C. Both operators were directed to respond to the notices within 30 days with sworn statements under penalty of perjury. Interference to amateur satellite operations was informally resolved through the VM program. Persistent interference to 3.868 MHz was determined to be from a foreign transmitter. There was one virtual club presentation about the volunteer monitoring program given to the Oro Valley Amateur Radio Club in Tucson, Arizona. The FCC requested assistance in 2 cases, a public safety case near McAllen, Texas, and a case involving unlicensed operation in California. The totals for this report's monitoring were 1,235 hours on HF frequencies and 2,003 hours on VHF frequencies and above, for a total of 3,238 monitoring hours. We thank Volunteer Monitor Program Administrator Riley Hollingsworth, K4ZDH, for this month's report.
Hello and welcome to the DX Corner for your weekly dose of DX. I'm Bill, AJ8B. I have a couple of reminders to start off with. First of all, the deadline for submission to be considered in the CQDX Marathon is January 5th of 2026, so that's about a week away. Check out the details at dxmarathon.com. Don't miss the deadline. Secondly, in the next couple of weeks, I will be passing along my list of goals and those can't-miss contests that are being held in 2026. Stay tuned for that. I need your feedback. Finally, I just wanted to say thank you for going along with the weekly DX ride in 2025. The DX portion of the This Week in Ham Radio podcast has evolved into the This Week in DX program, which appears on both YouTube and in podcast format every Saturday morning. It is out there because of you, the listener and the viewer, and I appreciate it very much. Now, let's move along to the final DX report for 2025. The following DX information comes from Bernie, W3UR, editor of the Daily DX, the Weekly DX, and the How's DX column in QST. If you would like a free 2-week trial of the Daily DX, your only source of real-time DX information, do what other listeners have done and drop me a note at thedxmentor@gmail.com and I'll get you fixed up. Well, let's start out with a couple of announcements. First, the NCDXF has awarded a $10,000 grant to the Desecheo KP5 Island DXpedition. Quote, the Northern California DX Foundation, NCDXF, is excited to announce a $10,000 lead grant supporting the upcoming KP5 Desecheo Island DXpedition, scheduled for January of 2026. Official permission to land on Desecheo and operate has been granted to Otis, NP4 Golf. NP4 Golf approached us as the leader of the DXpedition with a plan to utilize remote operating. NCDXF has been a supporter of this idea and an advocate for allowing ham radio to places not normally accessible. KP5 is also a top 20 DX entity and qualifies for the, quote, Make DX Happen Award. Respectfully submitted, Craig Thompson, K9CT, NCDXF Vice President, end quote. And I really thank the NCDXF for supporting leading-edge technology, new ways of conducting DXpeditions, and as always, supporting DXpeditions in general. So thank you. Secondly, not to be outdone, Indexa is supporting the KP5/NP3 VI DXpedition to Desecheo. Here's their announcement. Quote, the Indexa Board of Directors is honored to be supporting this project. It provides an enhanced method of operating from a DX location with extremely limited normal access. It has become increasingly difficult for amateur radio DXpeditions to get permission to land on and operate from many such locations, usually due to environmental concerns. We all know the difficulties of landing a large group of operators, infrastructure, antennas, and amplifiers. This project could very well be the beginning of a new alternative way for activating many difficult-to-access DXCC entities and to provide DXCC chasers a way to work on all-time new one. So thank you for DX Indexes for also taking the lead here and providing some funds. Finally, from the actual Desecheo KP5 team themselves, we have the following. Quote, the Deshiseo 2026 team is happy to report that we are making progress. We should be QRV in 2 weeks. Earlier this week, the KP4ES test station went QRT. The station was removed from the practice site and was taken to KP4 Alpha Alpha to begin the cleaning process. This cleaning is required as part of the biosecurity protocol prior to going to Deshiseo. Operators will still be practicing using the Kilo Papa 4 Echo Sierra call sign, but operating through the Kilo Papa 3 Hotel Superstation. Your contacts with KP4ES have helped our team to practice and prepare for the upcoming pileups while providing you with an opportunity to practice prior to our main event. We appreciate the help of the DX community. The Deshiseo2026.com website has been uploaded with propagation forecasts from VOACAP. You can use this information to help you take advantage of propagation opportunities. Thanks to Yari, OH6BG, for his contribution. The deployment team will meet again on January 9th for final preparations prior to our deployment window of January 12th to the 14th. Let's pray for some good weather. Stay tuned for more updates. 7-3, Steve, N2AJ, Media Officer and Pilot, end quote. Well, the success is, the support is growing, and I hope it will lead to great success for those guys. LZ0 Alpha, South Shetland Islands. LZ1 Alpha Alpha Whiskey, Ivo, is on his way to the South Shetland Islands where he will be working during the 34th Bulgarian Arctic Expedition. He plans to be QRV in his spare time as Lima Zulu 0 Alpha. The dates are from December 28th to February 16th, plus or minus 2 days. I recently heard that LZ0A on the air, so I know he made it safely. Ivo expects to be on 20 and possibly other bands on sideband and FT8, FT4. The activation is registered under IOTA reference AN-010 and WAP reference BUL-01. It also falls within CQ Zone 13, ITU Zone 73, DXCC Entity VP8, which is LU South Shetland Islands. Now, the South Shetland Islands are number 67 on the Club Log DXCC Most Wanted list, so they're moving up the list. So now we have an update on San Felix and San Ambrosia Islands. CE0X. Philippe, X-Ray Quebec 7 India Romeo, is preparing for his upcoming 3 Golf 0 X-Ray Quebec de-expedition to San Ambrosia, scheduled from January 12th to February 15th. He recently drove 14 hours to the port of Valparaiso to oversee his equipment being shipped to Juan Fernandez. Once all the necessary paperwork is completed, Philippe and his gear will continue on to San Ambrosia by charter vessel in the upcoming weeks. This update is courtesy of DX World, and thank you, DX World, for that. From Cambodia, which is X-Ray United, we have the following. Tom, Delta Lima 7 Baker Oscar, who is QRV until January 18th, is using the call sign X-Ray Uniform 7 Oscar. He will be active on 160 through 6 meters using CW sideband and FT8 with a focus on the lower bands. QSO information remains direct to TJ4WK or via LOTW, Club Log, or EQSL. French Polynesia, which is Fox Oscar. Fox Oscar stroke Juliet India 1 Juliet Kilo Whiskey is QRV until January 6th from Tikau and Tuamotu Islands. The band plan is to operate on 40, 20, 17, 15, 12, 10, and 6 meters on sideband CW and FT8. QSL to his home call of Juliet India 1 Juliet Kilo Whiskey or via LOTW. I mentioned this for the last couple of weeks, and he's been really active. French Guyana, which is Fox Yankee. Fox 4 Golf Peter Kilo Peter is QRV as Tango Oscar 2 Fox Yankee until January 15th from French Guyana. From the Gambia, which is Charlie 5, we have the following. Andre, Oscar November 7 Yankee Kilo, is currently QRV from the Gambia as C5 Yankee Kilo until January 25th. He is operating on sideband, RIDI, PSK, FT8, and FT4, and some CW on 20, 17, 15, 12, and 10 meters. QSO only via LOTW, EQSL, or direct to ON7YK. And he posts his logbooks on his website. From Greenland, which is Oscar X-Ray, we have this. Michael, whose call sign is Oscar X-Ray 3 Michael Charlie, operates out of the Pituffik Space Base in northwest Greenland. His upcoming assignment runs until February 25th, 2026. Michael is most active on weekends starting around 0400 Zulu and sometimes works radio in the evenings at 2100 Zulu. Michael does work HF sideband 160 through 10 meters. QSL is via the Danish OZ Bureau. He does not use electronic logging. From Kenya, we have 5 Zulu. Not an expedition, but an on-and-air casually holiday-style operation will be Michael Johnsen, Oscar Zulu 6, Alpha Bravo Lima, stroke 5 Zulu 4. He says he will try to get on the air as much as possible between January 15th and the 28th. It is his 14th trip to Kenya, but the first time taking a radio along. Michael will be on 80 through 6, but did not get permission for 60 meters. QSL to his home call, Oscar Zulu 6, Alpha Bravo Lima, and LOTW and Club Log. Zulu 3, the Republic of North Macedonia. The special event call sign of Z380CEF is being used to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the Ham Radio Club, Stevo Patakat, in Bitola, Republic of North Macedonia. The club, formerly known as YU5CEF and currently as the Zulu 37 Charlie Echo Fox, has been active since 1946. Operations will continue until December 31 of 2026. From Burkina Faso, which is X-Ray Tango, we have this. Max, Delta Kilo 1, Mike Alpha X-Ray will be in Burkina Faso from January 4th to January 11th, 2026, operating as X-Ray Tango 2, Mike Alpha X-Ray. He plans to use an IC7300 with up to 100 watts of power, working mostly on 20 to 6 meters and possibly lower bands if conditions allow. Modes will include CW sideband and FT8, which might also include MSHV, but no Foxhound. QSLs will be handled via EA5 Golf Lima and Club Log with daily free LOTW uploads. And finally, the DX Mentor features a new podcast episode this weekend, a discussion with Dave, KJ9I, about 6 meters, 6 meter EME, and a potential EME de-expedition. Check it out and let me know what you think. Until next week, this is Bill, AJB, saying 7-3, and thanks to my XYL Karen for her love and support. I hope to hear you in the pileups. Have a great DX week and a great 2026.
Welcome to the 49th segment of Ham Radio History, a century of amateur radio, Ham's organizations, events, inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR. Our thanks go out to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for allowing us to use his website as we prepare these segments. Now come along with us as we bring forth this next chapter of Ham Radio History. Call and card. CQ uses a general call for initiating a contact took time to become an acceptable practice in the early years. Serious operators frowned on its use, mostly because it had been used to excess in the old days along the little boys with squeak boxes, usually in exceedingly long and sparsely identified calls. In March 1921, QST announced an operating event called the ARRL CQ Party to be run on April Fool's Day. The writer, unnamed, asserted that CQ meant that some bird is causing unnecessary QRM and that the ARRL operating department had declared war on CQ as an outgrown antique. Beginning at midnight, participants were to call CQ with high power and any old speed according to a schedule that allocated a 3-minute time slot for each call district. Thus, everyone who was not transmitting could see how many districts they could hear, which might actually be useful. This would end at 12:30 a.m., when all stations in all districts would call simultaneously, nonsensical by design. Maybe Mars will hear us, they wrote. The party really did run and was enjoyed for the farce it was. There was almost as many HIs floating around as there were CQs, showing that most of the gang appreciated the spirit of the thing, noted ARRL Secretary Kenneth Warner. But its other purpose was to discourage calling CQ during relay schedules and to show up the foolishness of the unholy amount of CQing that has gone on every night all over the country, causing untold interference that is so unnecessary. Persistent CQing is nothing less than a bad habit, accomplishes nothing good whatever, and merely breaks up communication in nearby states, scolded Warner. CQ had its origin in maritime wireless, used by ships seeking nearby stations to which they could pass messages. So, although calling CQ was labeled a nuisance by Warner, he also allowed that it might still have a legitimate, similar use in traffic handling. Nevertheless, interminably long CQs with hardly a call sign mentioned were bad form and just caused QRM, he cautioned. Over the next 2 years, either attitudes and behavior had changed, or the use of CQ became too pervasive to do anything about, or both. In late 1923, Warner wrote yet again about the practice, calling it a great evil in amateur radio today, but he equivocated, admitting that there were amateurs on both sides of the issue, those who use CQ all the time and those who believe that its use is cause for license revocation, and that neither was right. He cited cases where it had value, briefly announcing one's presence on the air and directional calls for a particular region with the intention of sending traffic. The abuse of CQ was the problem. Some amateurs would call long CQs just to get listeners to send a reception report card. This, he asserted, was unjustified abuse of the ether. One wonders if there was such a thing as a justified abuse of the ether. But long CQs, in hopes of starting a QSO, were also nonsensical, argued Warner, since they often had the opposite effect, and good amateurs refused to answer the long drawn-out CQ of an ether mutilator, and oftener than not, nobody will stay with you while you consume 10 minutes calling. There is too much on the air that is interesting. A good example of proper CQing was 6ZZ, who was considered a gateway station, key in connecting regions for relaying message traffic. It therefore made sense for him to announce when he was available. He used a single CQ and a single call for such an announcement, and then would stand by for 15 seconds before trying again. Let's be more reasonable about this thing, fellows, and stop abusing CQ, implored Warner. F.M. Keefe aboard SS Domalva in Rotterdam wrote with humor to add his own voice to the complaints about the never-ending CQs. He regularly spent time trying to copy calls so that he could contribute to the calls heard section of QST, but he had finally had enough. After straining my ears, patience, and vocabulary, t'other night while following an endless chain of CQs that never signed or faded just before the psychological moment, I decided that things ain't what they used to be. Having cast my decision, I proceeded to cast the remains of the Remington, a typewriter, at the ship's cat, don't possess a corona as per 6ZZ. Missed the cat and hit the third mate on the knee, and he QSL'd with a right hook to the jaw that would have done credit to Jack Dolarski himself. He has no sense of humor, I guess, 'cause how was I to know it was his lap the cat was sleeping on? But that's a different story. According to Keefe, ships in the Atlantic had less time to listen the further east they sailed, due to this time difference and the ever earlier dawn. Thus his frustration arose from wasting his precious listening time on CQ callers. He endorsed the idea that stations using long CQs should never be cited in calls heard to discourage their ceaseless, senseless, endless CQing. While some amateurs continued to shun its use and actively avoided answering stations calling CQ, others saw that it had a valid purpose. Traffic manager Fred Schnell set out to establish guidelines for its use as a standard ARRL practice in early 1924. His concept still focused on handling message traffic rather than its present-day use as a general call for a QSO. Its purpose, he stated, was to indicate that a station wishes to communicate with another station, meaning the calling station has traffic for some other station. However, he facetiously acknowledged that in typical amateur radio use, CQ has had a meaning which goes something like this: I want some DX cards, which will never be QSL'd. Will somebody please answer who is at a distance greater than 2,000 miles so that I can tell him NIL HR DRP CRD CUL 73 GN. This CW shorthand means nothing more here. Drop me a card. See you later. 73. Good night. It has degenerated into the call of the DX card hound, who seldom acknowledges receipt of a report card. The most common practice was to send a card to a station to report it and to expect the owner of that station to acknowledge or QSL your report. More on this will be presented in the next section on QSL cards. The guidelines Schnell set forth had mostly to do with timing. Never call CQ too long, listen for at least 5 minutes before calling, and do not call CQ more than once or twice in 15 minutes. 3 CQs and 3 call signs was the standard format he suggested, and it was to be used to announce that you were ready to receive traffic. If you had traffic to clear, you should first listen for a station already on the air, located closer to the message's destination. If none was heard, a directional CQ was called for, as in CQ North or CQ Washington. We'll continue this segment next week. Included in this material are quotes from the following: ARRL CQ Party, April 1st, QST, March 1921, page 22. The CQ Party Editorial, QST, May 1921, page 28. A Nuisance Editorial, QST, December 1922, page 42. Da-di-da-dit-da-da-di-da, Editorial, QST, November 1923, page 34. Amen, Brother, Amen, Radio Communications by the Amateurs, QST, November 1923, page 50. F.H. Schnell, How to Use CQ, QST, May 1924, page 20. With a tip of the TWIAR cap to Chris Cadella, W2PA, for the use of his website, Ham Radio History, A Century of Amateur Radio, Ham's Organizations, Events, Inventions. I'm Will Rogers, K5WLR, reporting for This Week in Amateur Radio.
Google will build 3 subsea cables in Papua New Guinea, which is the largest Pacific island nation, said funded by Australia under a mutual defense treaty in a key upgrade to its digital backbone. Australian and U.S. military strategists view resource-rich but largely undeveloped Papua New Guinea as having a prized location north of Australia at a time when China is boosting its influence in the region. The $180 million-plus effort will link northern and southern Papua New Guinea and the Bougainville Autonomous Region with high-capacity cables, said PNG's acting Minister for Information and Communications. The entire investment, funded through Australia's commitments under the Puk-Puk Treaty, he said in his statement, referred to a mutual defense pact signed in October. Google said last month it planned to build a data hub on Australia's Indian Ocean outpost of Christmas Island, and another strategic defense location, with new cables linking the island with Australian cities hosting key defense bases also used by the U.S. military. 2 or more cable systems will extend westwards to Africa and to Asia to deepen the resilience of American ocean internet infrastructure, Google said.
The beta release of Satellites and Climate Change is now available online. This course is the second online course published as part of the AMSAT Youth Initiative's series, How Satellites in Space Help Us Live a Better Life Here on Earth. The course was written by Eric Sonnenwald, N2XSE. Eric, a retired science teacher in Lake Hopatcong, New Jersey, is a graduate of Montclair State University with an MS in Geosciences and the former science curriculum coordinator for Hardenston Middle School. In order to expedite the development of the courses and keep costs low, one of Eric's most challenging tasks in creating the lessons is sourcing copyright-free graphics and related resources. Fortunately, there is a relatively abundant pool of free materials available on government and college websites from which to draw. From Eric's content, other AMSAT volunteers use specialized software to format the content into an online presentation. The Satellite and Climate Change course follows the Introduction to Satellite Meteorology course introduced at Hamvention 2025. Several improvements have been added to the lessons format, including the ability to zoom in and enlarge complex graphics shown on the screens. This is an important addition since students often use smartphones or tablets, which use much smaller screens than laptops or desktop computers. The third course, Satellites and Pollution Control, is scheduled for launch within the next week or two, followed by Satellites and Preservation of Natural Resources in January. In all, 14 courses are scheduled for publication by the end of 2026. Frank Karnaskis, N1UW, AMSAT Vice President of Development and creator of the Youth Initiative, explains, our approach to getting youth interested in satellites and amateur radio is to attract their attention and participation in topics of current events and widespread interest. We explain how satellites are an integral component of almost every facet of modern living, and from there introduce the concept of critical information provided by satellites, then telemetry, and communications. We provide access to experiences with satellite telemetry via amateur radio satellite ground stations to access ARIS packet and voice stations aboard the International Space Station, as well as other amateur radio satellites. Essentially, we try to set the hook by giving students access to shortwave listening experiences in the same way many of us got our start in amateur radio, and with hands-on opportunity to download and analyze actual telemetry. A unique concept in designing the Youth Initiative program is that it is community-based, and the program is available to all youth through their own self-interest, though homeschooling and through programs such as Scouting, 4-H, or commonly based programs for youth with special needs. Teachers are welcome to incorporate the materials into their curriculum where their school boards allow them to do so. But the key here is that school participation is not needed for parents or other leaders to utilize the materials. Karnaskis further explained that all materials are available online at no charge to everyone and all persons interested in furthering the interest of students in science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics. AMSAT is grateful to Amateur Radio Digital Communications for a generous grant to cover the cost of software licenses for online development and for supplemental technical artwork. Readers can preview the online courses at buzzsat.com.
Bruce Page, KK5DO, is here now with this week's AMSAT report. Bruce?
Thanks, John. We hope you had a wonderful New Year's and celebrated with some time on the air. As 2025 is behind us, we look forward to many more universities, colleges, and organizations building, testing, and launching their new satellites with even more interesting experiments on board. AMSAT is working on the Gulf program. AMSAT is also working on their education outreach for elementary, middle, and high school students. As there is no cost for a student under the age of 25 to join AMSAT, this is a great opportunity to stay in the know with email updates and news about satellites. Did you know that the LEO satellites, depending on their orbit, have a life expectancy from several months to around 5 to 7 years? In fact, as they are so small, they burn up very early in their reentry. This is Bruce Page, KK5DO. Back to you, John.
And thanks, Bruce, for that report.
It is time once again for the weekly look at space weather and the terrestrial propagation forecast. The January 2nd, 2026 report from spaceweather.com has updated details about the coronal mass ejections predicted to hit Earth on January 3rd and 4th. Solar wind parameters are expected to be disturbed through January 4th, 2026, due to a combination of coronal hole high-speed stream and coronal mass ejection activity. There is the potential for glancing influences late into January 3rd from CMEs that left the Sun on December 28th through the 30th. Additional enhancements are possible again on January 4th, with the possible indirect impact of the CME that left the Sun on January 2nd. By early January 3rd, the arrival of the December 31st ejection is expected to cause unsettled minor to moderate storming. Additional geomagnetic storming is anticipated on January 4th with the possible impact of the January 2nd coronal mass ejection. Solar activity is expected to be predominantly low through January 24th, with C-class flares expected throughout the outlook period. M-class minor to moderate flares range from a chance to likely at times as active regions evolve and rotate on and off the disk. Solar activity is likely to be moderate with a chance for X-class flares through January 2nd due to the current magnetic complexity and development of the active regions on the visible solar disk. Periods of active conditions are likely on January 9th and 10th, and additionally on January 12th through the 14th due to negative polarity coronal hole high-speed stream influences. In the current 11-year cycle, we have become accustomed to the fact that the parameters of the ionosphere differ from those measured in previous cycles at the same level of solar activity. For example, the critical frequencies of the F2 ionospheric layer are significantly lower. This will probably also apply to the rest of the cycle. Even so, the forecast of a slower decline in solar activity is favorable for shortwave propagation. For more information concerning radio propagation, visit the ARRL Technical Information Service, read A Quick Guide to HF Propagation Using Solar Indices, and check out the propagation page of Carl Lewetzel-Swab K9LA. For customizable propagation charts, visit the VOACAP online for Ham Radio website.
Just ahead in radio sport this week on January 1st, the ARRL Straight Key Night, that is CW. Also on January 1st, the AGB New Year's Snowball Contest, CW Phone and Digital. January 1st and the 2nd, Walk for the Bacon QRP Contest, that's CW. January 1st, the SARTG New Year RTTY Contest is digital. January 1st as well, the AGCW Happy New Year Contest, that's digital. January 1st, the IRTS 80-meter Counties Contest, that's CW and phone. And on January 3rd, ARRL Kids Day, CW phone and digital. And remember to visit the ARRL contest calendar for more events and information. Upcoming section, state, and division conventions on January 10th, Ham Radio University, ARRL New York City, Long Island Section Convention. That's in Brookville, New York. January 16th through the 17th, the Southwest Florida Regional Ham Fest, ARRL Southern Florida Section Convention in Fort Myers, Florida. January 30th through the 31st, the Jackson, Mississippi Capital City Ham Fest, ARRL Mississippi State Convention. That's in Jackson, Mississippi. And remember to check the ARRL Ham Fest and Convention database to find more events in your area.
Foundations of Amateur Radio. One of the potentially trickier aspects of putting together your shack is connecting the radio to the antenna. On the face of it, the challenge is limited to making sure that you have mating connectors on both ends. But when you actually start implementing this, you'll run into several other considerations. The very first one, as I said, is the connector. Every amateur I've ever spoken to goes through the same process. You pick a connector, typically the one that your radio comes with, then you adapt the connector on your coaxial cable to suit. Then you'll get an SWR meter, a dummy load, some testing gear, a coax switch or two, perhaps another radio or an amplifier, and along the way you'll discover that you now have a growing collection of connectors to choose from, and that's just the connectors inside the shack. After considering connectors, you'll start to contemplate the coax itself. You'll likely weigh price against signal loss, but there are other aspects to the selection of the right coax for the job. For example, how do you get the coax actually into the shack? One of the main challenges associated with solving that problem is surprisingly something that rarely affects our hobby, other than any human factors associated with the phenomenon of weather. Getting coax into a shack generally involves passing through a weatherproof barrier of some sort. In doing so, you're likely to create a place where the weather can make its way into places it's not supposed to. Water can and will travel along your coax. Hopefully on the outside of it, but if you're unlucky, on the inside too, likely destroying it along the way. At first glance, you'll think that water only travels down with gravity, and in an ideal world, you'd be right. But as it happens, water will happily do other things, like get blown by the wind, or condensate in temperature gradients like those found near a hole you just created in your lovely weatherproof barrier. If your shack has existing openings, they're generally the easiest to appropriate. Things like gaps in the eaves, existing vent holes between roof tiles or sheet iron, plenty of existing places where you can get from inside to outside a shack. Note that this is also the case if your shack is a trestle table tucked away in an office, like mine. Before I continue, I'm about to raise some potential safety issues, but I'm not an occupational health and safety professional, so do your own due diligence. If you do need to go into your roof space, height aside, consider it a dangerous place. Make sure that there's someone to check on you, and consider alternatives to climbing up there. Wearing a face mask and full body clothing is a very good idea. Often you'll find exposed wires, deteriorating or toxic insulation, and other nasty things. Conductivity of steel roof frames and pipes are also a hazard, so be extremely reluctant to venture there. Avoidance is preferable. Working at heights 101. Don't. That said, there may be no alternative. You can lift corrugated iron sheets by undoing the roofing screws. If you do, make absolutely sure that you don't make a string of water inlet points when you put it all back together. In lifting a sheet, you can access the roof space and run your coax. Sometimes the gap between the corrugation and the rafters is sufficient to push the coax through. But if you live in a hot climate, make sure that it doesn't touch the sheeting, since coax is likely to distort, if not outright melt, if it's in direct contact with the iron sheet while the sun is belting down on it. Consider the temperature rating of your coax. Similarly, terracotta roof tiles tend to have enough space to allow coax to enter the roof space. Be very careful, since they're often fragile and potentially irreplaceable. Look for openings like existing roof fittings, things like chimneys, vent pipes, roof ridges, etc. for simpler points of entry. If you need to make a hole in your roof and seal it, there's special rubber grommets for this purpose. You cut a little opening in the grommet, too tight for the coax, then force it through. Seal to the roof with UV-stable silicone and you're good to go. Check them every so many years, they deteriorate. Speaking of silicone, if there's an existing hole that you're using, don't just seal it up. It might be there for a reason. Windows often have vent holes or gaps that will fit some types of coax, and there's inserts you can use to open a sliding window that will accommodate coax, but consider the security of that window before you commit. There's also special flat coax for running through a window frame or under a door, but check before you buy that they're suitable for the job. Ladder line is also an option. It's much thinner, can travel longer distances, but its performance can be affected by corrugated iron and other conductors. Rarely, if ever, does the initial acquisition of coaxial cable involve details like bending radius, the smallest turn you can make with the coax without destroying its characteristics, since bending causes the insulation, the core and the shield to distort to some degree, and with it affect the RF passing through. Whichever path your coax takes, consider that you can cut it short but not long. If you really must know how long the coax is, use some string to run along the proposed path. But beware, the string has a bending radius that approaches 0. Coax does not. Most coax will specify a bending radius for fixed and repeated bending. The fixed one is for a one-time only bend, and 65 mm is typical. Thinner coax tends to have a smaller bending radius, but that might affect the signal loss or the budget, or both, so take that into account. Cutting and joining also introduces points of failure, places of moisture ingress, thick spots that cannot be pulled through existing holes, and plenty of other hidden fun and games. In other words, don't be stingy, get it right. It might cost a few bob extra, but you'll have a happier time of it. If you need to run your coax inside a wall, the tool you're looking for is called a cavity king, not of the embalming variety, though relevant if you happen to do something foolish, like drill a hole through an existing power wire in your building. So don't start drilling holes where it suits without checking first. If you do, make sure that you drill on an angle facing upwards from the outside and find a place where the coax itself doesn't get wet on the way in. Speaking of holes, terminate the coax after you installed it, not before. You can use electrical tape to attach a rope to pull the coax along its route without damaging the coax. Before you close up the roof and pack everything away, attach the connectors to the coax and properly test it. If it fails your tests, it's easier to run it again with everything in place than it is to start from scratch. Ask me how I know. In my shack, I have a run of RG214 that goes to my VHF-UHF vertical. I also have a run of Quad Shield RG6 that goes to my HF antenna. If you're familiar with coax indicators, you'll know that RG6 is actually 75 ohm, not 50 ohm. Given that it's made from aluminium, not copper, it's also an absolute turd to solder. What it does have going for it is that it's absurdly cheap, since it's used in satellite dish installations across the planet. It also very handily can be terminated with F-type compression connectors, which in the 25 years I've used them, I've yet to see fail. The F-type connector can accommodate a handy B and C adapter, bringing us back into the realm of amateur radio. My coax goes under the corrugated iron of my roof, through the plasterboard of my office wall, hidden away in a cupboard, snakes under the cupboard door along the wall to the termination coax switch that is in turn connected to my radio. More on that another time. The two coax runs are tied together to ensure that they don't coil weirdly, don't pose a trip hazard, and it's connected to various fixed points along its path. None of it is permanent, other than the hole in the plasterboard inside a cupboard behind a faceplate. So after removing the coax, a blanking plate brings everything back to invisible, if that's ever required. What happens outside is a whole different story, and what it attaches to yet another. The point is that from the place of picking the right connector, you likely discovered that routing coax is potentially a bigger challenge than you might have considered at first. There are other options. What issues affect the ingress of coax at your shack? I'm Ono, Victor Kilo 6, Foxtrot Lima Alpha Bravo.
Bob McGuire, N4HY, has announced the release of a new satellite tracking application entitled Visible Ephemeris. Visible Ephemeris is a modern spiritual successor to QuickTrack, re-engineered for the Raspberry Pi 5 and modern silicon. It is capable of propagating 13,000-plus satellites in real time with sub-second updates while maintaining less than 5% CPU utilization. Visible Ephemeris is a high-performance physics-based program using Kelso Villardo SPG-4 to track satellites all in the Celestrak TLE. It uses McGuire's implementation of Pedro Escobar AOS-LOS search, but rewritten for altitude and not eccentric anomaly. The code is designed for and intended for Raspberry Pi and displays graphics components using Web UI. It features a hybrid decoupled architecture where the UI, orbital mechanics, and network services run on independent threads, ensuring the interface never freezes even during heavy calculation loads. Visible Ephemeris has been released under the MIT license, and further details can be found at github.com.
In a prelude to a real deal, the 4 astronauts of the Artemis II mission boarded their Orion spacecraft inside the Vehicle Assembly Building at the Kennedy Space Center on Saturday afternoon, December 20th. The 3 Americans and 1 Canadian participated in a launch day rehearsal referred to as the Countdown Demonstration Test, or CDDT. It was the first opportunity for everyone involved with the mission to be on hand and to go through the motions of the big day with the fully integrated rocket in the loop instead of just data simulations. The test appeared to reach its conclusion with a cutoff of the simulated countdown at the T-minus 29 seconds point at the 2251 UTC. The rehearsal is already running at least a month behind schedule. It was scheduled for November 19th, but NASA postponed that, eventually blaming a blemish on a thermal barrier surrounding the Orion crew access hatch, which prevented its closure. The test was rescheduled for December 17th, but that too was abruptly delayed without explanation. NASA also says the launch will take place no later than April of 2026.
Is it snowing where you are, Mr. Tyson? On a quiet shoreline in southern Maryland, a simple sentence made history, and the world hasn't stopped talking since. Now, 125 years later, Cobb Island invites you to stand where it all began and witness the moment that launched the wireless age. On Tuesday, December 23, 2025, the Charles County Amateur Radio Club hosted a public celebration commemorating the 125th anniversary of the first successful wireless transmission of the human voice, conducted by Canadian inventor Reginald Fessenden on Cobb Island in 1900. It was on Cobb Island on December 23, 1900, that Canadian inventor Reginald Fessenden, working on behalf of the U.S. Weather Bureau, accomplished what was then believed to be impossible. He successfully transmitted a brief, intelligible voice message over the air from a transmitter site on the island to a receiver nearly a mile away. His message reportedly, 1, 2, 3, 4, is it snowing where you are, Mr. Thyssen? Marked the first known instance of radio telephony and lay the foundation for modern AM broadcasting.
ARRL has awarded a $5,000 Colvin Award grant to the Delta X-ray Group, organizers of the upcoming 3Y OK DXpedition to Bouvet Island, scheduled for February and March 2026. Bouvet is a remote island in the Southern Ocean, populated only by seals and penguins, and known for its treacherous weather and surf conditions. It is a territory of Norway, and nearly all of it is covered by glaciers. The most recent amateur radio operation from Bouvet was the 3Y OJ DXpedition in 2023, which moved the island from number 2 on the Club Log Most Wanted list to number 10. 2 camps are planned, according to team leaders, operating all HF bands, with 1 camp focusing on high band propagation to North America when conditions allow. Each camp will consist of 3 tents, serving as operating, sleeping, and communal spaces. These tents have previously been used on Bouvet Island, and team leaders say that they have proven capable of withstanding the extreme conditions expected. Plans call for the team to leave for Bouvet from Cape Town, South Africa on February 1st, weather permitting. 3Y OK plans to use helicopter airlifts to transport personnel and equipment between the vessel and the island. The group expects to spend 3 weeks on and around the island and will attempt to make contact with as many other ham radio operators around the world as they can, using up to 8 stations operating on CW, SSB, FT8, RTTY, and the QO100 geostationary satellites. The 3Y OK DXpedition is perhaps the most expensive ham radio expedition ever mounted, with a budget of $1.7 million, most of which, $1.2 million, is for what the team refers to as a reliable commercial Arctic-Antarctic vessel, noting that safe and reliable ship transportation continues to be a challenge for such remote island expeditions, and the cost continues to rise. Team leaders note that the foremost priority of the 3Y OK expedition is the safety of the operating team, support personnel, and the vessel and helicopter crews. The team consists of 24 operators from 14 countries. 2 of the team members are young hams, 21-year-old Max Friedman, N4ML, and ARRL staff member, and 26-year-old Alex Scheinberg, DL2ALY, an aviation engineer currently working at a German research station in Antarctica. The Colvin Award is funded by an endowment established by the legendary DX couple Lloyd Colvin, W6KG, and Iris Colvin, W6QL, both now deceased. The award is intended to support amateur radio projects that promote international goodwill in the field of DX. Other major financial support for DXpedition have come from Northern California DX Foundation, the International DX Association, and the German DX Foundation. The complete 3Y OK log will be uploaded to the ARRL's Logbook of the World within 12 months following the DXpedition. LOTW is used by radio amateurs to track their progress towards awards, including the ARRL DXCC Award and the DX Century Club Award, which is achieved by confirming on-the-air contacts with 100 geographic entities. We extend our sincere thanks to all equipment sponsors and financial supporters, and, particularly, the ARRL Colvin Award Grant. Without this collective support, activating Bouvet Island and delivering an all-time new one from the number 10 Club Log DXCC Most Wanted entity would not be possible. The team continues to seek financial support from the amateur radio community. For more information, visit 3yok.com.
ARDC, the Amateur Radio Digital Communications Foundation, awarded more than $4 million in grants in 2024, according to tax filings released in mid-November 2025. Grants ranged from multiple $1,000 donations to various organizations to help programs related to amateur radio and digital communications technology, to major grants to support the Courage Kenny Handyham program, an organization supporting amateur radio and assistive technology for people with disabilities, the Asociación Civil Artermundi in Cordoba, Argentina, to strengthen community mesh networks, the University of Victoria in British Columbia to create a modular cube satellite radio, and $507,500 to fund the ARDC scholarship managed by the ARRL Foundation Scholarship Program. It is time once again for another edition of AMSAT Satellite Shorts from all over. They weren't home for Christmas, but astronauts in space found their own way to make the season bright. They've even hung their space stockings by the airlock with care. 4 astronauts on the International Space Station sent their best Christmas wishes to Earth as they orbit our planet. NASA astronauts Mike Finke, Zena Cardman, and Chris Williams, and Kimiya Yui of the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency sent a video Christmas card home as they and 3 other crewmates spent the holidays 400 kilometers above Earth. Greetings to planet Earth, all of our friends and family from Expedition 74 aboard the International Space Station. Flying high above, said Finke, who commands the Expedition 74 crew on the ISS. Thinking of you during this holiday season. You can watch the heartwarming greeting and feel the season bright on YouTube. And finally, this week, the global space sector is entering a phase of large-scale satellite constellations and expanded human lunar activity, driving a sharp increase in demand for access to orbit. Within the next 2 decades, the total mass launched to space is expected to reach several 100,000 tons, with annual launch counts projected in the tens of thousands and continuing to grow. Launch providers therefore face simultaneous requirements for low cost, high flight rates, and airline-style reliability in space transportation systems. Reusable launch vehicles have reduced per-flight cost, but they do not yet deliver the launch tempo and reliability needed for this next phase of activity. A study in the Chinese Journal of Aeronautics argues that artificial intelligence applied across launch vehicle life cycles could address these remaining bottlenecks and become a disruptive technology following reusability in space transportation. The authors outline 4 main roles for AI in launch systems: agile test and launch preparation, high reliability flight, rapid maintenance, and efficient safety operation and control.
In the United Kingdom, the Commonwealth Contest Community and the Radio Society of Great Britain are grieving the loss of an advocate and a friend, an active ham who twice served the Radio Society as its president. Although he made his living in the world of high-tech as a solid-state physicist, Bob Whalen, G3PJT, was in so many ways a full-time radio amateur. He received his license in 1961, focusing on CW operating on the HF and lower frequency bands. And as his enthusiasm for contesting grew, he made a name for himself as a supporter of the Commonwealth Contest, a CW contest for amateurs in British Commonwealth countries such as New Zealand, Canada, Australia, and of course the UK. He also built an online presence for its widely scattered participants, eventually writing a book about the contest's evolution. Bob has also been actively involved in the International Amateur Radio Union and the First Class Operators Club, with a growing involvement in the Radio Society of Great Britain over the years. His participation grew from being a volunteer in the Society's HF Committee to becoming president, serving from 2002 to 2003 and again from 2013 to 2014. Bob became a silent key on December 4.
Volusia County, Florida's volunteer ham radio team, serving the County Emergency Operations Center as its backup disaster communications unit, has achieved top U.S. national honors in the 2025 Field Day competition. This long-running event, held annually since 1935, challenges teams across the country to demonstrate excellence in emergency-ready communications under demanding, real-world conditions. Competing against 160 Emergency Operations Center affiliated teams nationwide, the Volusia County group rose to the top with an impressive score of 9,093 points, more than 1,200 points ahead of their nearest competitor. Their setup featured 4 fully operational stations running simultaneously, along with an additional public get-on-the-air station that introduced visitors to long-distance radio communication without the use of mobile phones or the Internet.
The newly formed Headwaters Amateur Radio Club of Montana is growing strong. Members are preparing to hold their first meeting on January 19th at the Belgrade Chamber of Commerce office and making plans to participate in Winter Field Day a week later. According to their publicity director, Carol Flaherty, KA7ROL, the club was formed recently in Belgrade and has already had some success holding a net using 2-meter simplex. They are hoping to establish a repeater very soon. The biggest priority will be to provide emergency communications to the various communities in this snowstorm and windstorm-prone region in Montana's Gallatin Valley. For now, the club continues in growth mode. Carol said members expect to welcome area university students and some of the scouts who received their ham licenses after the last summer's camporee.
Software builders and tinkerers are being sent a special message from a fellow ham on behalf of radio operators like him who are blind or have low vision, keeping them from enjoying some digital modes. One of the gifts that Daryl Hilliker, NU7I, has provided to users of contemporary technology is his blog, Blind Access Journal. As an advocate for people who are blind, like Daryl, or perhaps challenged by low vision or obstacles posed by aging, he has developed his blog to provide resources to developers, decision makers, and other consumers of technology so they can make the modern world more accessible to everyone. The Arizona Radio Amateur has now issued a call, a QST in every sense, asking fellow hams to turn their efforts toward making digital mode software such as WSJT-X more accessible too. Daryl said in a press release that the increasing popularity of digital modes has made it harder for hams with disabilities to participate fully because an accessible user interface is missing from the software. He wrote, "A month doesn't go by where I don't hear at least one conversation on the bands where an older ham is contemplating giving up or curtailing their activities due to a physical disability like arthritis or a visual impairment. We can do better as a community, and we can do it together." He went on to say in an email that he is issuing a call through his blog to inspire and engage members of the amateur radio community. He said that because WSJT-X is open source, it provides an opportunity for collaboration for improvements in keyboard navigation, screen reader support, and overall usability. He hopes his blog can be a place where advocates, developers, and users can brainstorm. To volunteer or simply to learn more, contact Daryl at editor@blindaccessjournal, that's all one word, .com.
2026 marks the 250th anniversary of the United States Declaration of Independence. And to honor this milestone, the ARRL has introduced a special year-long Worked All States Award called the America 250 WAS. This for Purchase Award will be available throughout 2026 via Logbook of the World, and only QSLs made via LOTW count toward the award. The America 250 Worked All States Award is earned by confirming contact with all 50 states between midnight UTC January 1st, 2026 and 23:59 UTC December 31st, 2026.
In a world where trust has become a scarce resource, amateur radio operators offer something different: human communication that connects people around the world who share the same passion. In a digital age in which screens shape reality and algorithms steer public opinion, there exists another arena, quiet and largely unnoticed, where a very different kind of communication takes place. It is a world in which private individuals, enthusiasts connect countries, break down barriers, and build bridges that at times precede official policy. On October 7th, 2023, an amateur radio operator named Shlomo Goldstein, who was trapped in a safe room in Kibbutz Kisufim, managed to call for help via a fellow radio amateur in Ramat Gan. He was saved. In Israel, this contribution has received official recognition. The Knesset has acknowledged amateur radio operators as emergency communications operators and dedicated legislation which allows them to establish antennas and stations in their homes with minimal regulatory barriers. The law is enshrined in the state's statute book and reflects a deep understanding of their national and humanitarian contribution.
Almost a year ago, 90% of Chile was plunged into darkness during a national blackout, causing the government to declare a state of emergency. Recalling that disaster recently, the mayor of the municipality of Villa Alemana, Nelson Este, said the only ones that were functioning and available were amateur radio operators. If anything of that magnitude should ever happen again, or, for that matter, should almost any emergency occur at all, the municipality knows that radio operators are there. Now, however, it's been formalized, and Los Molinos Amateur Radio Club has signed an agreement with Villa Alemana in support of the Communal Emergency Operations Committee. The club's president, Lorenzo Pasalacqua, CA2PJP, said the agreement strengthens an already healthy working relationship established some time ago. He said all that was missing was an official signing of that agreement.
4 rules covering the amateur radio service in the United States are marked for elimination by the Federal Communications Commission unless the agency receives objections filed no later than January 2nd, objections that it considers worthy of consideration. The FCC plans to otherwise remove the 4 rules, 3 of which it called obsolete, and 1 that it says duplicates an existing provision. The FCC published its intention in the Federal Register and identified the rules. They are provisions in Part 97.27, 97.29, 97.315, Subpart B, Paragraph 2, considered out of date by the FCC. The 4th provision is 97.521, Subpart B, which relates to volunteer examiner coordinators. The FCC has scheduled the removal of the 4 rules on February 10th. The agency's action is part of its broader 2025 initiative to remove regulations that it considers burdensome or no longer necessary. To see each of these rules relevant to ham radio in depth, visit federalregister.gov.
And finally this week, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters was created for the country's ham radio operators 100 years ago in Auckland on August 16th. Not looking to miss out on a full-scale celebration this year, hams have already begun marking the occasion with modified call signs. So how do you show pride in the group that has come to represent and advocate for amateur radio in New Zealand? One way is to drop the ZL prefix and swap it out with a ZM during the centenary year of 2026. So be listening. The ZM prefix is a recognized special event call sign in New Zealand and has been used before. This occasion is a far happier one than the previous authorizations of radio spectrum management, which allowed the use of ZM during the period of the COVID-19 lockdown. Don't worry, the ZL prefix isn't going away this year. You'll see. Be hearing for special event call signs such as ZL100MVL and ZL100AM, which have been approved for use until March 31st, 2026. Here's to the next 100 years for New Zealand's amateurs.
This week in amateur radio is holding open auditions for news anchors for the weekly national worldwide amateur radio news service. If you have a good radio voice and can reliably read provided news copy, we are looking for you. This, of course, is an all-volunteer position. An amateur radio license is not required. You must have a high-quality microphone, headset mics are not used, and be familiar with audio editing software to record and edit your finished news stories before uploading. If you would like to try out for a weekly or bi-weekly anchor position with North America's premier amateur radio news on air and podcast, please send an email to our producer, George, W2XBS. You can include a sample MP3 of yourself reading news copy sent as an attachment to W2XBS77@gmail.com. That's whiskey, the number 2, X-ray Bravo Sierra 77@gmail.com. Be sure and use Anchor Audition in the subject line. Please include your phone number and a good window of time for a callback to discuss your submission and our operating logistics to see if This Week in Amateur Radio is a good fit for you. We hope to hear from you soon. This Week in Amateur Radio is heard around the world on amateur radio repeater systems, streaming on the internet, or on great low-power FM broadcast stations like WGXC-FM, part of the Waveform, on 90.7 MHz in Akron, New York, serving Greene County and the southern regions of New York's Capital District. Many of the news and information items heard in this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio have been provided by the American Radio Relay League, the ARRL Audio News Service, and the ARRL Letter, AMSAT, the Radio Amateurs of Canada, the Shortwave Listening Post, the Federal Communications Commission, the Radio Society of Great Britain, and Ofcom, the South African Radio League, the International Amateur Radio Union, the Wireless Institute of Australia and the Australian Communications and Media Authority, the New Zealand Association of Radio Transmitters, the Amateur Radio Newsline, the Rain Hamcast, Eric Guth, 4Z1UG and QSO Today, QRZ.com, the International Telecommunications Union, the 425DX News, Parks on the Air, and the Soda Reflector, and various news sources on the Internet.
With special thanks to all our weekly news sources and to you, our listeners, that wraps up this edition of This Week in Amateur Radio. If you'd like to write to us, you can find everything you need, including archive editions of the news service, at our website at twiar.net. And now, for all of us at This Week in Amateur Radio headquarters and our news team around the world, this is Chris Perrine, KB2FAF, wishing you a 73.